Hello and welcome to everyone tuning in today. I'm Jennifer Wexton and I represent Virginia's 10th District in the United States House of Representatives. I'm grateful to be joined by some impressive guests for this Domestic Violence Awareness Month Roundtable, where we'll discuss domestic violence response and prevention in our community, as well as highlight survivor support services that are available. This discussion of domestic violence, unfortunately, is a very topical one. With COVID keeping many folks at home and health and financial burdens continuing to weigh on people, there's been an alarming increase in demand for domestic violence services. Throughout the past year and a half, I've kept in close contact with our victim service agencies, a couple of whom are joining us today, to make sure that they have what they need to serve every survivor in Virginia's 10th District. I successfully advocated for the passage of the VOCA Fix Act over the summer to avoid a disastrous reduction in funding that would have harmed critical services. And just this week, we passed the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act to strengthen key domestic violence programs and reauthorize funding for local shelters and resource providers. Another topic we'll focus on is domestic violence prevention. While much of today's attention and resources are focused on, and rightly so, importantly, getting help to the victims of domestic violence, we can't ignore the proven methods that can help reduce the likelihood of violence in the first place, like bystander empowerment, teaching safe and healthy relationships, fostering protective environments, and fighting stigmas. I was proud to introduce new bipartisan legislation this week to develop a national strategy for domestic violence prevention in the U.S. This action plan would expand, coordinate, and evaluate prevention programs across all levels of government and relevant stakeholders so we can best keep victims safe from harm. We have lots to discuss and are joined by people who are doing incredible life-saving work. So without further ado, I'll now toss it to each of them for a very brief info of who they are and what they do. And we're just going to go around the horn as I see you. So we're going to start with you, Katie, from Manassas City PD here in Virginia 10. How are you today?
Hi, I am well, and I am so thankful to be joining you all today. This will be my first roundtable, and I'm new to the city, but I am Sergeant Barahona's counterpart, and I'm looking forward to my role and whatever I can do to serve the community, especially in this area.
Thanks so much. Well, with that, we will go a little bit out of turn and introduce Sergeant Barahona, Gio Barahona, also with the Manassas City Police Department.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, and thank you again for having us. Truly looking forward to this conversation. Great to see everyone. As Katie mentioned, my name is Sergeant Gio Barahona, and I'm the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the City of Manassas Police Department.
Diana Sosa, tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful topic. It's so important. I'm Diana Sosa. I work for Fairfax County Public Schools, and I'm a school social worker. I also had 20 years experience at the Community Services Board with Fairfax County as well. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. And I'm sure that experience with the Community Services Board dealing with mental health issues really has helped you in your current employment. So I'm glad to hear that you're here with us, and thank you for joining us. Josephine Gonzalez, it's great to have you here as well. Tell us a little bit about where you work and what you do.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. I'm the Domestic Abuse Response Team Program Manager for Loudoun County and an employee of LAWS, which is the Domestic Violence Service Provider in Loudoun, and I've been in the field for 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Josephine. Brian O'Connor, tell us a little bit about Futures Without Violence. And it's my understanding you're joining us from California. So thanks for getting up a little bit early to join us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And thanks to everybody for the invitation to participate in Futures Without Violence. We're a national organization that works to end domestic violence, sexual assault, and dating violence in particular. My role at Futures is to build out a portfolio around engaging men who are not and have not been historically invited into the conversation to be part of the solution. And so, again, just really happy to be here and love the diversity and cross-sectoral approach of the panel. So looking forward to hearing more about how the plan that you introduced is really going to coordinate efforts in a really important way. So thank you very much for this important work.
Thank you, Brian. Great to have you with us. And Stacy Zabel with DSVS. Can you tell us what DSVS stands for, please?
Sure. Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. And just to start and say thank you for hosting this today, and thank you for inviting us. Domestic and sexual violence services, we offer compassionate and comprehensive services to victims and survivors of sexual and domestic violence, human trafficking, and stalking. We also offer services to those who have used harm. And all of these services, counseling, advocacy, hospital accompaniment, court accompaniment, prevention, education, and more. We also host DVAC, the Domestic Violence Action Center here in Fairfax. And my name, as I said, was Stacey Zabel, and I'm a program manager of the countywide coordination team there at DSVS. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And we were complimenting your artwork. That's lovely. I understand that your kids have given you some decorations for your Zoom background, which is fantastic. So we appreciate that as well. It's very festive. Okay, so I want to start by kind of going around again and hearing a bit about what we're seeing in our communities, kind of set the table about where we are right now. And it sounds like we have a pretty good cross section from the criminal justice standpoint, from the schools, from the services standpoint. So let's start with someone in our services area. Stacey, we'll start with you because we were last time. So I believe in also people reverse alphabetical order helps too, because those of us at the end of the alphabet need to stick together.
Absolutely. Thank you for recognizing that. So what are we seeing in Fairfax County? I guess I'll start by saying that hotline calls are up. So our crisis line calls are up 22% from the same time last year. We don't know exactly if the call volume is that much higher. We did also improve our tech around it, but that, it does seem to be up. Our requests for counseling have gone up. They're 21% higher than the same time last year as well. Our LAP call, the lethality assessment protocol or program, where on the scene, we have the ability for a police officer to call in after asking 11 questions to establish risk and connect a victim or survivor with an advocate right there on the spot. Those calls are trending downward, and we're looking closely at that. And we're also, really looking and exploring the comfort of the community at around calling law enforcement. Could that be one of the reasons why there's the downward trend there? Perhaps communities might be hesitant to engage in that way. Shelter, there's much higher call volume for shelter. I think it's around 37% higher as compared to last year. And I think as, folks get more comfortable coming into communal spaces, that those requests are only going to increase. One of the things I think that's really worth pointing out, though, is that cases, the cases are more severe. They're complex. The hotline calls are longer. The community saying, and these are other victim service providers in addition to DSVS, seeing things like malicious wounding, also sexual assault at bars and restaurants have really increased since pre-pandemic. Folks, they talk about financial insecurities and the impacts those are having, unemployment, inability to pay rent, and these kinds of concerns. And of course, mental health needs. So these are the things that we're seeing and that we're hearing on the ground as well from other providers too.
Yes, it's interesting that you brought up that so many more of the calls that you're getting are more serious cases, because that's something that really is concerning to me. And I know that a lot of my local providers have indicated that the calls for strangulation type attacks have really gone up. And as somebody who's a former prosecutor in this space, I know how lethal those cases can end up being. So yeah. Great. Well, thank you. And Josephine, how about you? How about in your part of the world, your services providing, and what is that pretty much what you've seen? And do you have anything else that you want to add about it?
So yes, echoing a lot of what Stacey said, we have seen an increase in domestic violence. However, something that is different is that Loudoun County in the past 2 to 3 years averaged around 1,500 calls to law enforcement, domestic calls every year. In calendar year 2020, that went up by 200. So we saw 1,700 calls. In addition to that, we also have the lethality assessment program. Our high-risk screens went up by 42 in calendar year 2020. Mm-hmm. Our shelter saw we saw an increase of 2 times the numbers that we normally saw, and actually almost even three times that number that we normally see. So in the first few months of the pandemic, there was actually, our hotlines were quiet. We thought it was a decrease, and all of a sudden the numbers just skyrocketed. So that's what we're seeing. But I do want to echo the concerns about non-fatal strangulation, because those numbers have risen, and they're pretty steady at this point. So I keep the lethality assessment data, and through that data, we see that out of all our high-risk cases, around 61 to 63% have a history of strangulation.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty concerning, obviously. And one of the things I also was told is that because so many of the shelter care facilities had like a congregate setting to them, where they had shared spaces and shared common spaces and shared kitchen spaces and everything like that. They couldn't use those. You guys couldn't use those during COVID, and you had to find hotels for everybody, or other individual, housing, which made it extra challenging for you and very, very expensive. So I'm glad we were able to get the VOCA fix.
Yes, no, for sure. That's been so helpful because our resources are strained. But in addition to that, I do want to highlight mental health, as well, as Stacy was saying too, not just for survivors, for our community, but also for the workers. Anyone who's providing direct services right now, it's been tough on all our colleagues. The vicarious trauma is real and it's present. So I wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sergeant Barahona, what are you guys seeing in Manassas? I know that you don't see as much of the prevention side of things, at least in the law enforcement side, but tell us what you're seeing in terms of during COVID and the caseloads and things like that. I'm sorry, you're muted, Sergeant. You have to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. I'm going to echo what some of the folks already said. COVID obviously created a difficulty for us for the outreach and getting out there with regards to the prevention side of things. Our agency is typically very, very much involved in community forums, preventative conversations, Q&A with our community. And so we have to get a little bit more creative with social media in that sense, again, to further push our outreach efforts in that regards. COVID, the cases that we're seeing are we definitely saw an increase with domestic cases as well. We saw a little bit of strangulation cases. Most of our incidents involved simple assaults, so not major violence, but violence nonetheless. Our resources, we continue to work with our community partners quite a bit. We lean on CSB and folks like ACTS for resources. Overall, I would say that we continue our efforts. There's still a little bit of work to be had in that sense, but I'm sure we're going to get into that here in a little bit. But overall, again, collectively here in the city of Manassas, I got to say we have an excellent team and excellent resources for our community.
Great, thank you. And Katie, do you have anything to add about what's happening in Manassas, or the kinds of work that you guys are doing and ways you can have to prevent this uptick?
So like I mentioned, I am new in role, but, I think that just being proactive in the matter and just making sure that the community has these resources at their fingertips. And so I just really look forward to being on this call to hear about some of the part we can play when we do have these forums and we are out there and running into this.
Great, thank you so much. So I guess based on what you're saying is that, I know that resources have been an issue during COVID for everybody. And I've been very, very pleased, by the way, with the way that the community has stepped up and helped you guys with your resources. I guess one of the things I've heard from a lot of the nonprofits in the region is that when people got their stimulus checks, they would pay a certain portion of it to various charities, whether it be food banks or domestic violence organizations and things like that, which is good because I know that your expenses went up quite a bit. But it's been a top priority for me to make sure that our victim service agencies like laws and Fairfax's Domestic Violence Action Center have the resources they need. So what else can we do in Congress to ensure that efforts like yours on the ground to respond to domestic violence situations have the resources that they need in order to be able to function well? And that you have the continuing resources and don't have to worry about inconsistencies in funding, so that you know what you're gonna, have to do from year to year. Josephine, do you want to, or Stacy, you want to field that one first?
Accidentally unmuted. Absolutely.
All right. Well, that doesn't, no backsies.
That's absolutely fine. I think first, I just want to acknowledge how supportive you have been and what a difference and an impact it has made. The VOCA fix was huge. I mean, services were downsizing left and right, and this was having a really serious impact on victims and survivors. So I just want to acknowledge.
We've been throwing that term around quite a bit. And for those who aren't aware of what the VOCA fix is, the Victims of Crime Act got a bunch of its funding, almost all of its funding from prosecution, from fines and costs and additional charges associated with prosecutions. And so because there was a decrease over the last administration with the actual prosecutions, and there were a lot of these deferred prosecution agreements, the law didn't provide for funding or anything from those to be able to, a lot of times there weren't fines and costs assessed in the same way. And so there was no funding in that fund for Victims of Crimes Act. And so it was a real problem for our local service agencies. I mean, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars across the nation. So I'm very, very pleased that we got a fix in there to make sure that they got full funding and that they continue to be funded in the future. So that was a big deal, but we still got more to do, obviously, to make sure that we don't have those inconsistent funding sources. So thank you. Brian, I would imagine that you have some thoughts on this, and we haven't heard from you yet. So since you've got a national perspective.
Sure, thanks. Well, I also just want to, what's really bringing to light with what some of the other panelists have said is just also it's what we've known all along, is that in many respects is that there's been there's quite underreporting that occurs with this issue. And so what the pandemic has also done is really spotlighted some more of the reality that we know has been true pre-pandemic as well and continues throughout. I think another really important point to bring out when we're talking about victims and survivors is to really also uplift their children, right? And when what we have heard and seen from a futures and more from a prevention perspective around the work that we do in schools around addressing childhood trauma overall, and trauma that we know existed again pre-pandemic has been accelerated by the isolation and by the insecurities from housing and food as well, that we're only going to really see the unfortunate circumstances of that as we go on. And so just really focusing in on more of the safety nets and the supports will be really important. At the beginning of the pandemic and then throughout this past school year, the teachers, for example, that we worked with would be reaching out and saying, we're on Zoom. And when, a young student is either on camera, not on camera, they're oftentimes the first line of defense to see and hear and understand if something's going on at home, and not from a punitive standpoint, but so many teachers reaching out and saying, and educators saying, I care so much about my kids. Not only is there a real concern about the learning loss, but there's really care about their care, right? And the last thing I'll say with that is some of these other programs. We have programs when I talked about reaching out and my work around working with men in particular, and school sports was not in person, right? And so when we strip away so many of these extracurriculars as well, which were outlets for so many young people, the funding that schools need in order to build up their safety protocols, those programs aren't really coming back, right? And that's what we really know from a prevention standpoint around how we build more caring and consistent adults in the life of young people, is just hopefully we need to refocus in on how we kind of try to build some of that back, really, again, within the context of ensuring that everyone is safe and healthy.
I'm really, really glad you brought up the children, Brian, because that's so important. I see a lot of nodding heads around when you were talking about that, because, you know, we all, I mean, those of us who have kids know how important it is to model good behavior for them and things like that. And when you model bad behavior, when you model this destructive behavior, you know, that's what kids growing up thinking is normal. So they're more likely to be victimized. They're more likely to become victimizers themselves just because they think that that's normal and that's the way that things are. Diana, have you encountered, and this is also good because it brings us to prevention, which I think is super important, starting with, you know, that holistic whole family approach and the whole approach of not just the service providers and the law enforcement, but everybody all along the way in the schools and all those kids who touch kids, all those people who touch kids' lives and families' lives. Diana, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Fairfax County and for prevention and what you have seen in your job?
Sure. Thank you for having me again. And I agree with all the speakers. You know, having been shut down for so long, we're seeing a huge amount of uptakes, not only in some of the violence, but just in the extreme mental health needs. You know, when kids were locked out of schools for such a long time, most of the kids, especially in our school, their school was a safety net. And for food and resources and just, you know, just having a friendly adult and a caring adult there. And when they were all online, there was an increase of suicidality as well as violence. So when they came back here, I think in the first month, we've all been kind of scrambling, trying to support their needs because the increase in suicidality has, I would say, been up to 40% this year. We've gotten so many different resources out. The good news about where I work is we, back in, I think in 2009, we partnered with Northern Virginia Family Services, which funded their Violence Prevention Act. And so we can really look in the prevention side and also in the supportive side for kids that have been traumatized by violence in their home or violence with a dating relationship or violence in the community. Fairfax is just wonderful in that it has so many different resources. And we always do a team approach. So I'm always involved with juvenile court and the CSB and Department of Family Services and really looking at it at a holistic part. Plus, we also have parent projects, which really teaches parenting skills, even at the high school level. I work at a high school, so we see it all. So I think that I really am thankful for this forum because I think it brings resources together and to really look at it in a holistic approach, even with you know, the police, because the police play a huge part. You know, our SROs play a huge part in the lives of our kids here.
Yeah, that's so important, and I'm really glad that you guys are, you know, here taking care of our kids, and that they're back in school. I think it's been much better for everybody's mental health to have them back in school.
Absolutely.
Not to mention their learning ability and things like that. So it's wonderful. You know, I do want to give a quick shout out to my former colleague from the House of Delegates, Carrie Delaney, who introduced legislation to make clergy mandatory reporters, because this whole system of mandatory reporters is so important. You know, it's one of the things that was a real issue during COVID because, you know, when you have kids in class, you know, virtually and they don't have their cameras on, you don't get to have that interaction with them face to face. You don't get to have those conversations, those side conversations. It makes it really hard for teachers to be first reporters and so you know, that was one of the big sources of ways that we knew about what was happening with kids. So I'm just glad that we finally have them back in school and everything. And Josephine, you look like you might want to chime in. I'm sorry.
Good. Okay. I just wanted to reemphasize, you know, we all envision a future without violence. We all envision one in which everyone feels safe in their homes, which is why prevention is key. You know, primary prevention especially. So something that I think would be amazing is to have healthy relationships or just healthy dynamics taught even in elementary school, but in every school. And make it kind of a standard curriculum. So that's something that I think would be very helpful for prevention, especially.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I know that we have done is to expand the family life education curriculum to include a lot more about things like dating violence and and healthy relationships and just good touch, bad touch, and things like that maybe kids weren't aware of otherwise. But that is something where it is a voluntary curriculum. Not all schools have it. Not all parents participate for their kids. So I think that there's more that we can do, and that's one of the things I'm kind of hoping to do through this national action plan, to be able to make sure that we have those best practices and those evidence-based techniques and things like that can be pushed out to the states and then to the localities in a holistic, whole of government way, and a whole child way, and a whole family way. Because we're very fortunate, I think, in Northern Virginia, because we have some really great programs and some very enlightened agencies who really are working with the families and trying to have prevention as well as reaction. But there's a lot more that we can do at the national level. So Sergeant Barahona, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Manassas in terms of response, but also prevention.
Absolutely. We're doing quite a bit. Let me just share that. And it's not just us. It's truly, somebody mentioned, it's a holistic approach. And it truly takes an entire team to do what we do. But one of the things that we continue to do is we continue to have a dedicated officer reviewing all of our domestic violence reports. That officer is tasked with following up with families, essentially serving as a gateway to resources, or whatever that may be. And we don't just connect the resources, we continue to follow up. We continue to again, be there for our community, to help any way that we can. We continue to partner with their schools, Department of Family Services. Somebody mentioned our school resource officers. Let me tell you, they're extremely happy to be back in school, because these are officers that they love being there with the kids. They miss the kids. They miss the families, the engagement, the outreach, just being there as mentors, which, again, these are officers that are specifically selected because that's just who they are and that's what they want to be doing. And so we continue doing that. We continue participating with their schools in educational programs. Again, just to reach to our youth, right? Our little ones, that for them to know that they can reach out and talk to us. One of the other things that we launched, and this is truly exciting because it's new to us, it's our Community Vitality Officer program. Our agency, the Manassas City Police Department, launched this program in early 2020. Think of them as the SROs, but the external side of things. So after school, what happens, right? Now we have a service that, again, same as the SROs, where they were helping, assisting in any way possible during school hours. The community vitality officers are the gateway after school. So we're continuing, right, our resources so that families know that reach out to the community vitality officer. If kids have any questions or things come up outside of school hours, our community can go to the community vitality officer for anything. These community vitality officers are assigned to selected designated areas in our community. So they're not at the police department, they're housed within the communities in HOAs. So what we found is that's been very well received by our community, because it allows accessibility not just to law enforcement, but to any resource that a family may be in need of. Social media, I can't forget social media. In regards to our prevention efforts, again, with COVID, we've had to get creative with our efforts of the outreach, right? Letting folks know that we have all these wonderful resources. We have all these wonderful partners, and they're here to be utilized and to assist. So quite a bit going on in Manassas. But again, it's a holistic approach, and we couldn't absolutely not do this without our partners here all over. I don't even want to get into mentioning specific partners, because I would be afraid to leave anybody out because it's a lot of them.
You definitely don't want to do that and leave somebody out. Trust me, I've been there, done that, and it's not pretty. But thank you so much, and thank you for mentioning SROs. I mean, I can really speak to my experience as a prosecutor and as a parent in the Loudoun County Public Schools, and I can tell you that my kids loved their SRO in middle school. Officer Bennett with Leesburg Police Department, because he would come and eat lunch with the kids, and he would turn his French fries into fangs, and sometimes he'd stick them in his nose and stuff like that just to make the kids laugh. And if you've ever met middle school boys, that was a huge hit, right? So they had a great time, and they really, and he was the right kind of person for the job. Not everybody's cut out to be an SRO. If you want to be doing, that kind of like, narcotics rips and things like that, it's just not that kind of thing. But if you are the kind of officer who's cut out for it, who really wants to help the next generation and form those relationships, and also I think really teach kids that police are there to help them and be their friends, then you can make a huge difference. So I just I'm a big fan of SROs who know their why and why they're doing it. So thank you for bringing that up, as well as it sounds like you guys have really good prevention efforts in Manassas. I'm very pleased to hear that. It sounds like you're taking the whole child approach. When I was a prosecutor, and that's many years ago now, it was 20 years ago when I started with the Loudoun County Prosecutor's Office. But we had the domestic assault response team, but we didn't have a lot of these new techniques. A lot of the lethality assessments and things like that were not routinely used. And so I'm really pleased that that's been implemented in the years since, because I think it makes a huge difference in terms of targeting resources and making sure that the most vulnerable get the most attention. So I appreciate that. Now, Brian, did you have any thoughts on prevention and things that are being done in the community? I saw you thinking about chiming in from time to time, so I wanted to give you the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. I did. I wanted to follow up on what you were talking about with mandatory reporting, right? And what that looks like. And, at Futures, and it is an important tool, if you will. And what Futures, what we've coined is mandatory supporting, right? And so there's also opportunity where we can train what that really looks like, right? And so to approach that, the reporting is one thing, right? And then how we follow up within services that are from an approach of greater health and healing as well, particularly for adult and child survivor-centered approaches is really important. So, having a trauma-informed approach is something that we really think is at the center of how we move forward and build out. When you're talking about clergy, like how do we build out that kind? I'm just repeating what I was saying before, of like building out that constellation of caring and consistent adults. Actually, there's a federal program we work on called Changing Minds, right? And it's addressing childhood trauma out of OJJDP. And, the school is a hub, as the sergeant was talking about, and when SROs and the role that justice can play. And then, of course, educators within that same space, right? As well as then even, we have partnerships with the school nurses, right? So when you think about, and then after school, I was talking about coaches and after school programs and the Northern Virginia Big Brothers Big Sisters affiliate that we also work with. So when you think about health, justice, education, and community all coming together within that space, just is a lot of what you were talking about, Congresswoman, around the holistic approach, the whole child is just really important. So we call it mandatory supporting around Futures, and we're kind of coining that as well. So
I like that rebranding, and also making it what it should be, which is not just about making the report and then you're done, then your responsibility is over and everything like that. Because by their very nature, these folks are people who come in contact with these kids regularly, and are going to have an influence on them and be a part of their lives. So that's great. Thank you guys so much. Well, I know that we've had a really lively discussion, and I just want to make sure that those at home know the resources that are out there, because there are many, as you can see. So I just want to start with the 24/7 National Domestic Violence Hotline. Can be reached at 1-800-799-SAFE, 1-800-799-SAFE, which is 7233. I think that number will come up on the screen at some point. And Josephine and Stacy, can you start by telling us some other resources that might be out there for people who who are in trouble and maybe haven't had law enforcement contact them yet, but want to get some help before it's too late?
Yes, I'll go ahead and get started. So Laws also has a 24/7 hotline that can be reached, and we are the Domestic and Sexual Assault Crisis Center in Loudoun County. That number is 703-777-6552. Again, it's 703-777-6552. And we also believe in that holistic approach. So we have counseling services, support groups, we have advocacy, case management, accompaniment to the hospitals, to court. Again, as I mentioned, advocacy, but it really covers a lot of things that survivors need. So, and again, as you mentioned, Congresswoman Wexton, a survivor doesn't have to reach out to law enforcement if they don't feel comfortable. But of course, we work with all our community partners as well, if that's what the survivor wants. So it's a survivor-centered approach. Thank you.
Stacy, do you have any resources that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. We have the Domestic and Sexual Violence 24-hour hotline. That number is 703-360-7273. Again, it's 703-360-7273. That's staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that can also connect you to, as Josephine said, counseling, hospital accompaniment, advocacy, all of the supports that she mentioned that are, working to keep victims and survivors safe. We also offer services for those who use violence or feel like they would like, they feel like they want to use violence. So that is also an opportunity there. And just to mention that through that hotline number, folks would be connected also, they can be connected to the Domestic Violence Action Center, also known locally as DVAC. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And Diane, I don't mean to leave out our schools, so do you want to put in a plug for school social workers and guidance counselors?
Sure. And I wanted to give, for Fairfax, we have the mental health 24 emergency line at the CSB, and that number is 703-573-5679, and that's open 24/7. And then we have our CSB in Fairfax County, which is 703-383-8500. And I have two more resources. The Crisis Link Suicide Hotline, which is 1-800-SUICIDE. That's 1-800-SUICIDE. And we also have Children's Regional Crisis Response Team for parents, and they offer in-home counseling that the parents can set up if they have a child that is suicidal or homicidal. And that number is 1-844-627-4747. And for all of those that are watching in Fairfax County, if you need help within the county to find out resources for your children, please contact the school social workers because they're very knowledgeable at each school.
That's great. Now, and Sergeant Barona and Katie, do you guys have anybody that you'd like to add for Manassas area or Prince William County?
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, for citizens here in the city of Manassas, we want everybody to know that you can contact me directly at 703-257-8011. Again, 703-257-8011. I am the supervisor for our community services section, which means I'm a gateway into any resource that is out there. And so, although I don't deal with the resource day to day, we do have all these outstanding partners that are willing to help, some of which have been outlined already. I believe somebody mentioned the ACTS Domestic Violence Hotline. If not, that is 703-221-4951. It is a resource and partner that we here at the city of Manassas provide to our community. I also mentioned earlier the community vitality officers that are located here in the city of Manassas. One is located at the Georgetown South Community Center. There is an officer there throughout the week. For folks here in our city, feel free to please approach that officer with any questions that you may have. We also have another community vitality officer available to answer any questions and provide resources located at the Manassas Baptist Church on Sutley Road. So quite a few different avenues for our community to reach out to us. We want our community to do so because there's tons of resources, and we enjoy having this type of conversations with everyone.
Yeah, well, it's nice. It's nice that you guys are not just doing law enforcement functions, obviously, and that's good because when people call the police, it's because they just don't know who else to call a lot of times, and you guys end up doing. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations with this over the past year or two, about how the police become mental health, first responders as well as community service first responders and everything. So I'm glad to hear that if it's an issue of food insecurity or housing insecurity or something like that is causing those pressures where you're worried that something's going to give, I think that it's wonderful that you have that resource in the Manassas Police Department. So do not hesitate to call Sergeant Barahona because he's here to help. Thank you so much. And Brian, do you have any thoughts on issues on resources that we have nationally and things that can help some people who might need help?
So, well, as I mentioned, just various programs too. So more broadly, when thinking about, how we, and again, I go back to school as a hub, just thinking about the supports within schools and how one accesses the school nurse, the school counselor, the teacher, that really, again, is the constellation of adults. There's a program that we run called Coaching Boys into Men. And that is working with athletic coaches, particularly male athletic coaches, and they talk to their boys along the course of the sports season about building up healthy relationships and respect, and really how to be leaders in the locker room and in the hallways and in the classroom, right? And then also, as I mentioned before, Changing Minds. You can go to changingmindsnow.org, and that is a resource really for adults and professionals who work with young people across a whole array of various functions. And so that provides some tools and resources on addressing trauma more from an early intervention side. And there really boils down to 5 gestures. Again, things that we've known work, where you listen and you can celebrate and you collaborate and you inspire young people in that environment. So I'll stop there, but just want to say thanks for all the resources too. What I was really heartened by is to hear just how much support is available as well. And I think that we just need to make sure that it's out there so that people feel like they know about it and can access it.
Yeah, I think that that's the most important thing. And that's, part of what we're trying to do today, to let people know that those resources are out here. All you need to do is ask, and they will be provided. So thank you all so much. Does anybody have any closing thoughts that they want to share with the group for the good of the order before we wrap this up? I know that we had a pretty good discussion, but I didn't know if anybody else had anything else that they wanted to add. Make sure we got it in. Sergeant?
Yes. First and foremost, thank you for providing this platform, this opportunity to have this discussion. It's a very important discussion, as we all know. And it's an opportunity for us to reach out to our community, whoever that may be, to get the word out that there are resources. There are a lot of folks that are here to help, no matter what time it is, there's help. And from the City of Manassas Police Department, I just want to thank all of our community partners. I know I mentioned it quite a few times. It's truly a holistic approach. It takes an army to do what we do, and this cannot be done alone. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. And here at the police department, we're always looking for opportunities for partnerships. We have a general rule: if we're invited, we're coming. So please feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any questions. I'm here to help. And again, thank you very much, Ms. Wexton, for having this, for making this possible for us.
Thank you, Sergeant Barahona, for everything that you've done to help in this area and for your service. I know that it's been tough during COVID, but I'm really glad to have you guys on the job. So thank you so much. Yes, Brian.
One thing as well around just overall building awareness that this is happening, right? So for folks who might not be in an abusive or in a dangerous relationship, what has moved and heightening the awareness that this is happening in the community as well, and people who might have not known. And so what COVID has also spotlighted is kind of moving issues of violence against women and children, particularly domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, etc., moving it from the back page to the front page from a media standpoint. I was a former journalist, so I have to just say, before I moved into this the advocacy work I do at Futures. And so really heightening the awareness overall that this is happening and that there is help and that we all can be part of the solution is really important. So I think moving it to the headlines, albeit can be, can be jarring, can be sad. It's also something that, there are solutions. And so I appreciate what the sergeant was saying too. Like, we need to have more stories talking about how the response and how we're actually doing response and recovery as well.
Yep. Yeah. And it's so important to have awareness. And that's why it's good that we have Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I know it's already the 29th. This month has flown by, but it's always a good time to be aware of what's happening in your community. So thank you. Katie, did you have something you wanted to add?
I had kind of debated. I don't want to be repetitive, but I did want to echo what the sergeant had said. I do believe, and Brian mentioned it as well, that being accessible is everything. And I think that's something our department takes very seriously. When we think about being accessible and having the SROs out there and the CVOs and just the overall education for even just the patrol staff and all the way down, and creating that awareness is so important, especially when we're getting to know these kids outside of, the schools, and we're getting to know them in the communities. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to identify and, connect them with these resources. And it may not be the place, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that just, if this isn't happening in their home, they're just not aware, and they're not aware of some of the roadblocks that are being faced and the resources that are available until it's, front and center. So I think that's just so important, and just being able to be out there and be ready for those that are vulnerable and ready to, approach us, and connecting them with those resources. So we're happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm really, really glad to have you guys on the job. And I'm so delighted to represent Manassas, which has a true community policing model. And you guys are definitely out in the community talking with people and not just responding. You're being proactive and making sure that the community knows that you're there to protect and serve them. So I want to say thank you all for everything that you do.
Thank you. I was able to post a website of resources shared between Prince William and Manassas with in the comments of the live on your page.
Very good. Thank you. Diana, Stacy, or Josephine, do you guys have any closing thoughts that you want to share?
I just wanted to thank you, Congressman Wexton, for having this forum. It's a really important forum, and I really enjoyed participating. I think it's all about relationship building, whether it's relationship building with other service providers, with the students and their families, and bringing a whole community together to really brainstorm the best approach. I also believe in prevention and having more resources, like you said, about dating violence and running groups like that. That's so important in the work that we do. So thank you.
Thank you. Stacy, how about you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting this, Congresswoman Wexton. I just wanted to highlight, the prevention side, the prevention piece. I think, now more than ever, to counteract the effects of the pandemic, we need it now more than ever, to undo family and community risk factors for violence. And that can look a lot of different ways that got highlighted through this conversation, through healthy relationship skill building or engaging men and boys. I also think, we do need to really bring in those who have used harm have often been harmed themselves. And we do need to bring that into the continuum of care and start having serious conversations in that way too. So just thanks again for pushing prevention and pushing these important issues, and thanks. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today, Stacy. And Josephine, I don't want you to feel left out, so I want you to say something as well, if you don't mind.
Of course. Again, thank you for using your voice to advocate for survivors, for highlighting our resources, for using your platform for good. It's essential, as you know. And really, that's it. Just echoing what everyone else said. I don't want to repeat it, but I agree with what all our allied professionals have said. So again, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel much better knowing that we have all these resources locally, and all of the information about these various resources will be available on my Facebook page and on my website. So please do not hesitate to look them up if you're interested. And I just want to say thank you again. And this is really, I mean, feel so fortunate to live in this region because we have so many great resources and so many really dedicated professionals. And we also have pretty good, I think, resources for them. So, but there's still room for improvement, obviously. And I think that because I work nationally at the national level, I want to make sure that we can export all this success story to other areas and other regions. And that's what I'm trying to do with my National DV Response Act. So I think that, hopefully we'll have good news in the future, but I just feel so much better knowing you guys are here protecting families and victims and also working on the prevention so that more families don't have to go through this. So thank you so much for joining us here today. Take care, everybody. Enjoy and stay dry.